All right, welcome back to another segment of the Women in Publishing Summit. I'm Alexa Bigworth, your host of this amazing conference of incredible women who are really, in my opinion, changing the face of the publishing industry. And today we're going to talk about how you get your face in front of a whole lot of people when you're writing and publishing your books, because obviously, unless you're just writing a book because it's your grandma's favorite stories and you want to publish that and put it on your bookshelf, which people do and it's fantastic. Most of us are here because we want to know how to get publicity for our books, how to sell our books, how to market them, how to make money from our books. So I'm very excited to bring back a repeat guest from last year, Kristi Dosh. She is the CEO of Guide My Brand. She is a publicist, so this is obviously her area. And she founded Guide My Brand to work with entrepreneurs and authors, nonfiction authors primarily, to establish themselves as experts in their niches and become more visible for their expertise through opportunities such as guest blogs, podcast interviews, public speaking engagements, feature articles, and media appearances. She's done this all on her own. She is a published author. She has done all kinds of cool things and worked for Forbes and ESPN and all kinds of good stuff, which we will get into as appropriate. But what I want to say, first of all, thank you, Kristi, so much for being here. This is such an important part of publishing a book, I feel. And I think that so many authors, we were kind of discussing this before we started, is that so many authors wait till the last minute. And then they're like, okay, the book is done. I'm ready to publish. I'm ready to, help me get some coverage. And you're like, oh, dude.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different things that play into that. I think, in the beginning, you feel like you're probably spending a lot of time and energy and even money just to come up with the idea for the book and to write the book. And maybe you hire a coach and you're, spending money on a publisher. And so I think in the beginning, some of the objections I get from people is like, I'm already spending like all this money. I'm like, yeah, but is it going to be money well spent if you then have this book that no one knows about and no one buys? So I get that. But then what happens is they get 2 weeks, 30 days before the book comes out, and they are booking calls on my calendar and wanting to figure out how to market the book, because marketing for most people is either scary or uncomfortable, or they just don't like it. And so they save it till the last minute. And then quite honestly, it's too late. That's not enough time to market a book. I now have set like a very clear boundary with clients that we bring on, that they've got to have at least 90 days before their book launch, hopefully more, but a minimum of 90 days, because I need a minimum of 90 days to be able to line up the type of publicity that would have a real impact on your launch.
Yeah, gosh, I could just say ditto, ditto, ditto. I mean, it's so like we've worked with a lot of authors getting their books to market, and I mean, you can choose to write your book and publish it in 30 days and put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the disservices done to us by a lot of really big name entrepreneurs is selling and pushing these courses to write your book and publish it in 30 days and blah blah blah, and make $100,000. But the piece they don't tell you is that they've already done years of building their audience and their networks. They already have thousands, if not millions of people waiting for that book. For the you and me and the, first book, no audience author, it just does not happen. Even the phenomenon of like 50 Shades of Grey, like she already had 5 million readers that were following her from her fan fiction sites. So, nobody just launches a book and sells 1 million copies in one day without publicity.
Yeah. And the thing, I get aggravated because even I get those ads in my feed about, write your book over the weekend, publish by next Friday, or, write your book and publish in 30 days or whatever. And, what's frustrating to me is that so many of the people I know, especially in the entrepreneurial world, who are writing a book, they want the book to support their business in some way. Maybe it's as simple as just wanting to be positioned as an expert. For a lot of people I talk to, it's something like wanting to be a paid public speaker and wanting to, either make a living off of that, or at least have that be a big revenue stream for them in their business. And if you have those kind of aspirations for your book, you want it to have an impact on your business and really on your life, then it's your calling card. Like, why would you only spend 30 days on it? Like, and I listened to this podcast one time, and I wish I could remember the gentleman's name. And he wasn't involved in publishing or anything, but he had written a book and talked about how he was working with other authors. I think they were all maybe in a mastermind or something together. And other people were like, they wanted the cheapest book cover they could find. And they wanted, the cheapest way to publish. And they were cheaping out on everything. And he thought, if this is supposed to be your calling card, this is supposed to be what positions you as an expert in your space and makes people want to pay you, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars to come speak. Like, maybe it's worth a little bit of extra money to make sure that the book is really well done, that it has a great cover, that it's been copy edited and there aren't a bunch of mistakes in the book, and that you've put together a real marketing plan to tell people that this book exists and what it can do for them.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I'm going to continue on with this example because I just did a guest blog for somebody. So I was doing a lot of research on how, like, the phenomenon of someone launching their book and just shooting to the top of the charts, right? So I looked into 50 Shades of Grey because to me, that's like the most recent, like, super just like, how does this kind of happen? Right. So I was looking into exactly what did happen. And even with so when she got picked up by Vintage, which is an imprint of Random House, even with her followers that she had already built up, like, they still did a massive publicity campaign. The Today Show, everywhere. So if a person that they already know has 5 million loyal fans who have proven themselves by the activities that they had done prior to that, if a big imprint like that knows that they need to do that, why would we as small authors think that we don't need that to happen to make us? Now, granted, we're not all going to have a massive publisher behind us. We're not all going to be on the Today Show. We're not all going to do these kinds of things. But what I would like you to tell people is, how does somebody who is smaller, who is just an expert in their niche, but knows that they still want to get their message out there, how do they tackle those things? It's terrifying to me to think of trying to get on the Today Show. I don't even know where to start. So I just shut down. Like, nope, that's not in my wheelhouse. But I also, all the time, I'm like, man, I wish I could get on that show and talk to, I would love to see this person holding my book and sharing it on. And man, wouldn't I have 1 million more followers if Reese Witherspoon added my book to her book club?
Right. Part of the reason you have to start so early, we've had a few books that we've worked on where the person hasn't previously had a lot of publicity. They haven't been featured in big publications. Maybe they've done a few podcasts, but they weren't like big, huge podcasts. They've never done any TV. And so what we have to do in the beginning is get those opportunities. Like, you have to build the foundation first. We just had a book that we worked on, and the client really wanted to do television in Los Angeles, which was the client's home market. Well, most of the stations in Los Angeles will not have you on if you've never been on TV before. So what we have to do is go get the person on in San Diego or out in Palm Springs, somewhere that's a little easier to get a first timer on TV, so that we then have the clip to show the station in LA to get the person on. And then you'd use the clip from LA to maybe go for national. Not to say that national shows never have someone on who's, a first timer on TV. It happens. They have a post on Instagram that goes viral or something, and they end up on national television without ever having done TV before. It happens. Right. But it takes something like that. It takes something like that you can't plan for, like a random Instagram post you wrote about how you disciplined your kids and it goes viral. Like, you can't really plan for that. That kind of stuff just happens. So if you want to be strategic about it, you've got to have these little foundational pieces. Another good example is I have a lot of clients who want to write for Forbes or for Inc. And one of the things they don't know that I'll share now is both for Forbes and for Inc., when we pitch a client to write for one of those outlets, we are required to send them links to 3 other places you've written that aren't your own website. Right. So if I have a client who wants to get featured wants to write for Forbes, it's actually a little bit different to be featured, to be written about by a different writer. We can talk about that. But if you want to be the one who writes for Forbes or Inc., you have to have written some other places first. So now we're having to go back and seed those. Well, it takes time. We've got to pitch them. It might take them a week or 2 or 3 to respond to us. Then you've got to write the draft. Then they edit it. Then they put it in the queue to publish. From the day we pitch till the day the piece comes out, that could be as much as 6 weeks, kind of depending on the outlet. Really, the fastest we ever see is still at least a couple of weeks. And honestly, that doesn't happen very often. I bet the average from when we pitch a guest blog to when it publishes, I bet the average is a month or even a little over a month. Yeah. So, okay, if your book's coming out, let's say your book's coming out in, April, and we're giving ourselves 90 days, I'm already in a time crunch if you've never had any real publicity, because I'm having to seed all of this initial stuff to try to get to the bigger stuff by the time the launch is happening. And it all just takes time. Like podcasts, okay, we pitch them. We've got to wait for them to say yes. They're going to send their scheduler. There might not be time in their schedule for you to do the interview for another 2 or 3 weeks. You do the interview. Post-production takes another few weeks. So from the time we pitch till the time the podcast goes live, again, it can be 2 or 3 months with podcasts, because a lot of times they're scheduled out so far in advance. So you need that time to seed some opportunities so that you can use them to pitch for bigger opportunities, but also just the time for what this process takes. Even if you've had a little publicity and you're going for the bigger stuff already, if you can do it as early in the process as possible, the benefit is you can tell the podcast host or the editor, hey, my launch is the week of April 17th. Is there any way we can have this go live that week or the day my book is launching? Or maybe you want it to go the week before. And they're usually really flexible about it. If your book's coming out in a week and you ask them that, they're going to laugh at you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. And the places that will say yes to you don't have the kind of audience that you need. So yes, it's great. You get publicity on, so-and-so's cooking blog, but they only had 7 people read their blog last month. So it's not really achieving. Now it will get you the previous, but I'm sure also when someplace like Forbes, I don't know this for a fact because I've never written for Forbes. I'd like to change that in 2019. But I'm sure when they look at what you've published elsewhere, they also look at what type of site it was.
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
I think it's more important that you've just written somewhere other than your own site. Now, if it is somewhere they recognize, that's even better. Sure. But if we have a client who's really never had any publicity, they've never written on anyone else's site, they've never done a podcast interview, we do sometimes have to start with what you would consider to be smaller podcasts, smaller blogs, but you write for them once, and then you use that clip to pitch for the next place. I always tell people it's kind of like stair steps. Like everyone starts at the bottom. I've written for Forbes for a decade now, but I wrote on my own free little WordPress blog for 2 years and guest blogged on, 10 other sites before I started contributing for Forbes, and now I've been at Forbes for a decade and it's done amazing things for me. But everyone starts at the bottom. Right. So you've got to take the time to do those smaller opportunities in the beginning. And what I find happening, this happened with a retainer client a couple of years ago. She came to me and she was like, I just had my first 7-figure year, and she was giving me all these stats about how ginormous her business was and everything she'd done. And she was like, I want to write for Forbes. I said, yeah, well, you're going to have to go back and write for some other places first. So we had to go back and write for smaller publications. And she, 1, was a little irritated about it. And 2, she even felt, which I don't think she should have, but she felt a little embarrassed to be writing for these smaller publications when her other friends who had 7-figure businesses were writing for Forbes and Inc. and Entrepreneur and all these big publications because they had already done the seed work earlier on. She was having to go back and do it and then was like embarrassed about the opportunity she was doing. But we had to, because Forbes requires that we send links to 3 pieces you've written in places other than your own site. You have no choice. So that's just part of their rules. They have an editorial board that reviews you before you come on board as a contributor. I mean, it's a very kind of serious process. And if you wait because you feel like, a couple of reasons people wait. Either they don't know how to pitch, don't want to pitch, they're sort of hung up by that, or there's this enoughness issue we see a lot, especially with women, where they wait till they feel like they're enough. They've been in business long enough. They've made enough money, which is what happened with this person. She waited till she felt like she was big enough to warrant being in places like Forbes, when really there was tons of great publicity she could have been getting all along the way that, quite frankly, would have had an impact on her business. We have a lot of clients who, when we put them in more niche blogs and podcasts that some people might call smaller, but I like to say more niche, actually get better results. They get more calls booked on their calendar, more traffic on their website, more people buying into their programs on the more niche sites, because although Forbes sounds amazing and is so big, maybe only like 10% of people that read on Forbes are your ideal client. Whereas if you went on a more niche website that was 90% your ideal client, you might actually see better results. So something like Forbes is a great credibility builder. The logo looks great on your website. I get a huge portion of my paid speaking from Forbes. So absolutely, there are benefits to writing for Forbes, but there are also benefits to writing for these more niche places. And it's not just the sort of initial benefit we started talking about, where now you have that stuff to show the bigger sites or bigger podcasts, because we have bigger podcasts who will say, send me a link to where this person's been on a podcast before. And they want to hear what you're like on a podcast. So in all the different sort of types of publicity, there are these entry-level kind of opportunities, and you need to be taking advantage of them, or you'll never get to the bigger opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I think you've done a phenomenal job at letting people know, like, the why they need to be, like, we have to build our, well, in case it wasn't clear to you, you have to build your platform so that you can sell your books, sell your coaching program, sell whatever. And I don't remember if we said this prior to recording or not, but these strategies are mostly geared towards our nonfiction writers here who are building their businesses and doing all these types of things. Not to say that fiction writers can't do something similar, but this is most applicable for the nonfiction writers in the group. Okay, so let's take one step back and say to somebody who just got super overwhelmed by that whole thing, like, oh my gosh, now I not only have to do, I've got to find all these places. Let's start back a little bit further and say, what do you even write about? What do you pitch? How do you even know what to pitch to them and what to write about?
So what I generally tell my clients, and I'll tell you how I would adjust a little if you are really focusing on your book, but what I tell my entrepreneur clients in the beginning is make a list of frequently asked questions you get, and particularly questions you get on like a discovery call, potential client call, whatever you want to call it. And then on those initial phone calls with a client, those early stage questions that you get that you find yourself answering over and over, those questions are always going to be the best topics for guest blogs, for podcasts, for speaking engagements, because that's the entry point. You want to meet your ideal client where they are now, not where they're going to be 6 months down the road after they work with you, but where they are now. And the best way to do that is to focus on those frequently asked questions that you get in the beginning from folks. That's still where I pull most of my topics from. I do the same few topics kind of over and over, but with different angles. So one of the things I do a lot is, I don't call it mindset work, but it is this idea of getting people past the idea of not being enough. Mm-hmm. And I talk about how to position yourself as an expert. That's what I call it instead of mindset work. So I don't scare people off. And so I talk about it because if they already feel like they're not enough, you can scare them off quickly. So I talk about and the title I usually use is something like, how do you position yourself as an expert even if you don't feel like one? And then people are like, yeah, I don't feel like one, but I want to be one. And I use that topic over and over and over in guest blogs and podcasts, but I find different angles to approach it. So I might pitch myself to a podcast that's specifically for introverts, and I will adjust that topic just a little bit so that I am addressing some common questions I get specifically from introverts. Not all my clients are introverts, but some of them are, and I know what those questions look like. And so I have this topic I know super well about how to position people as an expert, and I bet I have talked about it from 100 different angles. And a lot of of that is using those questions I get on my discovery calls and on like my onboarding calls with clients, where I kind of note, their hangups or the common issues we've got to work through in the beginning. And that's how I attract new clients. Is then I go out and talk about those things on podcasts, or I write about them in guest blogs, and people say, wait, that's me, and then they're coming into my entry-level opt-in or my entry-level program. So I think those sort of frequently asked questions, start making a literal list, not just in your head. I use Evernote. Start a list somewhere and start listing those frequently asked questions. And your entire universe, as far as publicity goes, can revolve around those. And then when you know for sure what your book's going to be about and the kind of stuff that's in your book, you'll likely find some of those are related to things that are in your book. Or maybe you make a new list that's very specific to the book, problems that are solved by topics that are covered in the book, and then you focus on that. So we had a client recently that a lot of his book was about productivity as you scale as an entrepreneur from 6 figures to 7 figures and beyond. So we pitched a lot of productivity angles around his book, where he could go and do a podcast or write a guest blog and teach about one tiny little practice he has in his business. And then if people wanted to learn more, then the book was getting plugged.
Yeah, so that's an important distinction to make too, is that when you're pitching these places, you're not pitching them, hey, I wrote a book.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good point. Yes, because some of what I see is people have put together a press release about the book and they're just emailing the press release to people. I can tell you, I was a professional journalist full-time for several years, and I still do it part-time. I get 100 or more press releases a day in my journalist inbox. First of all, I open very few of them, but the ones that I do open sort of as soon as I can see it's a press release and that there's nothing else to go with it. They haven't written me any sort of personal note or pitch. It's just the press release. I'm already done, because chances are it probably isn't on topic for me, and I don't want to dig around and try to figure out how I could write about it. You want to do as much of their job for them as you can. So this last author who focused on productivity, we found, for example, writers at Forbes and Inc. and Entrepreneur and all the big business publications who had written about productivity before. So we knew they already had some level of interest in it, that they knew their audience already had some level of interest in it. And we would say at the beginning of the pitch, I read your piece on, XYZ, and I think I've got another expert who has a different angle on this. So now you're proving to them that you've done your research. They are a good fit, and here's why, because you've sort of reiterated that to them at the beginning of your pitch. And then you can say, I have a book coming out, that focuses on productivity. Here's the name of the book. Here's the date that it's coming out. If you're working on any productivity pieces in the future, I would love to serve as a resource for you. Here's some of the things I could talk about. And you can kind of bullet story ideas for them and tell them, here's a great angle that's never been covered on your site about productivity before. Have you ever thought about this? You want to give them almost headline ideas and topic ideas so they're like, okay, yeah, I could write a piece about that. Instead of, if you send them a press release on your book, they're like, how could I approach this? Where would I work it at? You're asking them to think too much, quite frankly. Most of them have to pump out a certain number of articles a day or a week. They don't have that time to think. If you can spoon feed them an idea, and sometimes we'll even go a step further and we will give them some suggested quotes. We do that. Some of you may be familiar with Help a Reporter Out, HARO. We tell people the best way to respond to HARO is to give people quotes and say, feel free to use any of these quotes in your piece, because those people are working under a deadline and they're working fast. They're going to take the first few people who respond, who are a good fit. And if you have spoon fed them quotes they can copy and paste, I can tell you as a journalist who's used HARO, I'm way more likely to use those people, because now I don't have to come up with questions and email them to you and wait for you to email me back. And you've already given me quotes I can copy and paste right into my piece. I never even have to talk to you anymore, which sounds awful, but I'm on a deadline. I got to do this fast and I got to move on to my next story, or I'm not making any money as a writer. So the easier you can make the other person's job, the more likely they are to cover you in your book.
So, oh my gosh, that little nugget of information was probably, for me, I'm very familiar with Kristi. I've gone through her course, but that was new. And this is one of the things that I love about you is that you're constantly evolving and adding to your strategy and adding content. I think you're very generous with your clients. So thank you as a client. But that was huge, that little nugget of information, because I've applied for many hero things. I've heard back from maybe 2 or 3, so now I know that, wow, this is a great way. And even, as an author myself, though I spend a whole lot less time doing anything with my books than I do with other people's, even if you can just get a blurb someplace that you can put, or, then you can add the as featured on or as quoted on or whatever. It's such a big credibility thing. And for us as women, if the enoughness factor is a thing, and the more of those little things that you can have to say, hey, somebody thought I was smart enough to quote me Forbes or whatever. It helps you more as well, not even the people who are looking at you. But
and here's something else to know too, because another hang up I find people have is they think they're bothering the person on the other end of the email, which you might be if you pitched yesterday and you're following up 24 hours later and did you get my pitch? Are you going to use me?
Right.
You are bothering them. But that initial pitch, keep in mind, at Forbes as a contributor, we are required to write 5 pieces a month or we don't get our payment for that month.
Wow.
So keep in mind that the person on the other end, my husband writes for Forbes as well in a different section than me. And there are months where we're getting towards the end of the month and we were busy with our day jobs and we're crap, I still need to write 2 more pieces before the end of the month or I'm not getting paid. And I'll go through my inbox and look for the stuff I got pitched, and I will look and see which one would be the easiest for me to write. Which one could I write the fastest? That's also a topic I'm interested in. I won't write about just anything. I have a very clearly defined, they call it a swim lane at Forbes about the stuff that I cover. But I read the pitches that I get, especially from people who have, again, like I was talking about earlier, made my job easier. People who send me an idea and then they've got, I write about sports business for Forbes just so I can make the example a little more clear. So sometimes I'll get pitched on how Clemson leveraged its national championship win. And they're telling me exactly what the digital department and the athletic department, what they did on social media. And then they've got stats, we had 2,000% more engagement on Twitter, and we also saw that from our tweets, 75% of people clicked over to the university website. They've got all these interesting stats for me. It is so easy for me to build a story around that. I don't have to get on the phone and interview anybody. I might email them back and have a few follow-up questions, but it's something fast and easy and interesting, and I know my readers will like. So just remember that it's not just you asking them for something. I think we view it like that. We're asking them to do a favor by featuring us. Okay. It's their job to find interesting stories in whatever their swim lane, whatever their niche is. It's their job to find interesting stories. It's their job to inform their readers or educate their readers or teach them something new, and sometimes they're out of ideas. They've been writing about the same topics for years and they're fresh out of new ideas. It happens to me all the time as a writer. Yeah. So understand that they need you as much as you need them. Mm-hmm. But the best thing you can do is do as much of their job for them as you can. Make sure you've really researched what's been written about and that you're not pitching an idea they just wrote about 3 months ago. That takes time. And quite honestly, that's the reason people hire me. It's not because I'm better at getting someone into Forbes that I have a better shot than they have on their own. The only reason I might have a better shot is I might know some of the editors because I write there and because I've pitched other clients there, and because I'll do the grunt work, I'll do the legwork and go back and see who's written what and who's writing in your area and have they covered that topic. It's the legwork that people pay me for because you can do it yourself. And you're in my group program and I can teach you how to do it yourself if you've got the time. The only reason you need a publicist is because you don't have the time and you want someone to do it for you. And there's some built-in connections that are helpful, but any of you who are watching this can get yourself into Forbes. Any of you. I'm 100% sure because I've had tons of clients who I want to do it who've done it themselves. So any of you can do it, but it's understanding the right way to do it. And the right way to do it is not blasting a press release about your book. It's finding writers who are in your niche and telling them, hey, there's something new here. Here's what your audience could learn. And oh, by the way, it happens to come from a book, but you're not shoving the book down their throat.
I think that's so great. And in case you didn't make the distinction between the two types of things she was talking about, first we covered how you become a writer on Forbes so that you're featured as a writer. And then the second one was how you just get featured on Forbes, which if the first idea scares you to pieces, then maybe you start with the second idea. And now all of you who are doing anything to do with sports will be emailing Kristi. But, I think that's a really cool thing to think about too, that if you're terrified of the idea of writing for, which first of all, we're all writers, so none of us should be terrified of, but it is the pitch. It's not the writing part that's scary. It's the pitching and all that goes along with rejection and fear and all of those types of things. Oh my goodness, there was something else. I just totally lost track of what I was going to ask you next. Okay, so, I know what I was going to ask. So one of the things that I love about your course is that you do really dig into that. I don't want to use the word clickability because that has such a negative connotation. Like we don't want clickbait, obviously, but being able to capture what makes your topic important and how important that is when you're trying to get out on big sites and stations. So that I want to talk about that. And then I don't want to forget to ask, is it different? Is the written media process different than the TV media process? And can you talk a little bit about that?
No, from my perspective, pitching is the same largely, no matter what medium it is, whether it's a podcast, radio, TV, speaking, a magazine that's actually in print versus, somewhere you're blogging, you're having an online article. The pitching largely looks the same. There are some small tweaks we make in the format of our pitch for different mediums. I don't even think they're necessary. I mean, I was getting myself on stuff long before I developed kind of all of the formulas I have now. And when I go back and look at some of the pitches I sent in the beginning, I mean, they are truly cringeworthy. The first one I sent to get on TV, truly cringeworthy. But you know what? It worked. I got on TV. So bad pitches can get you on TV too. What I tell people, and this sort of goes to the first comment you were making, what I tell people is there's a few things that have to be in your pitch. And it's not so important. I mean, it can be helpful for them to be in the right order, but the most important thing is that they're there. And you talked to, I forget exactly how you worded it when you were asking the question, but you talked about having to show them like why your message is important or why it's needed. The way that we tend to do that in our pitches, because I tell my clients, you have to prove in your pitch, you've got to prove to the person reading it, regardless of what format publicity we're pitching for, you've got to prove to them that there is a problem that a majority or at least a decent percentage of their audience has. So you have to prove there's a problem, first of all. Then you have to position yourself as the person to, solve the problem or provide guidance around the problem. And I feel like there's a third thing. You got to prove there's a problem. You've got to prove you're the right person to solve it. And then you've got to make like the ask to be the person. I feel like I'm missing another piece that I sometimes talk about, but I think it'll come out as I talk about it. So the way that we teach pitching is we tell people, because it's hard to prove the problem. So the shortcut way I found to prove the problem is go find a stat. Mm-hmm. Look for, I call it a shocking or surprising stat or fact. So for example, I have a client who's in the wedding industry. They train other people in the wedding industry, florists, wedding planners, anybody who deals with weddings. They train them how to grow their businesses because there's a ton of people in the wedding industry who are like barely making enough to get by. There's a low bar of entry to get into most types of wedding industry. There's a low bar to be a wedding planner. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot you have to do. You don't have to have a certain degree. You don't have to get, certified by somebody like you do to be a lawyer, at the state level. So there's this low bar to entry, which means a lot of people get in, but not a lot of people necessarily succeed. So we found this stat that talked about how big the wedding industry is, and it was, billions of dollars, but then how much the average photographer makes, which was tiny. So we find stats like that where we prove there is a problem, okay? And the problem we were highlighting is vendors, people in the wedding industry have no idea how to grow their business. They're usually creative and they're great at a floral display, not great at growing and scaling a business. They don't have that business mind. And I'm overgeneralizing, obviously. But, so we identified the problem is that there's a low barrier to entry. And so then people get in, they're not great at growing their business, and they don't make a lot of money. Okay. Then we positioned our client as the person to solve that problem. Our client built her wedding business to over $1 million and then sold it and made millions. So she clearly knows how to build a business within this industry. So we positioned her as the person to solve the problem. And we, depending on whether it was a podcast or a speaking engagement or a guest blog, we would be suggesting specific topics that she could talk about on the podcast or write about in the blog. And then we thank them for their time and tell them, we can't wait to hear back from them to schedule a time for her to come on their podcast. So you frame up and prove there's a problem. You position yourself as the person to solve the problem. And then you give, specific topic ideas that you want to talk about or write about. The order that's the order I would put it in. But as long as those pieces are in there somewhere, you've got a pretty good pitch. And quite frankly, better than the first pitches I was sending. And I still got into Forbes 10 years ago. I got paid speaking. I got on TV. I eventually got hired away from my law practice by ESPN because of all the publicity I was getting. So you can already be 10 steps ahead of where I was when I started.
It's fantastic. And, you just laid out the entire process, which thank you for providing that, because that's a great process. But I think that we go back to what you were talking about with the legwork, and that's where people still fail. Like it's not super rocket science. Like once somebody lays it out for you, it's like, oh, that makes sense. It's the actual implementation and why you would want to have somebody on your team who could do that for you. And I can tell you for a fact, because I'm always like, I can do that. I know how to find a stat. I know how to write, but when was the last time I spent 4 hours researching to find my stat and putting together my beautifully crafted pitch and finding the places to send it to and sending those emails and remembering to follow up if I hadn't heard anything a week later. And it's very, very time consuming. But, these are the things where we talked earlier in the conversation about people looking for the cheapest route to market, the cheapest route. This is your thing. And if it's not your thing, then maybe you don't have to spend all of these things on there, all of these things and do all of these things. But if this is your thing, then you have to have, I think about Coca-Cola. Who in the world has not heard about Coca-Cola?
Right.
Yet they are still spending millions, maybe billions of dollars a year in ad spots in the Super Bowl or, wherever. If they still feel the need, my husband and I were laughing because the Social Security has a marketing department.
Right.
First of all, it makes me mad as a taxpayer. Why are we paying for publicity of Social Security when it's you don't have to do anything. You just get it. But there's a reason why some people are talking about this. I don't know why they're paying for marketing. But so, just as you might listen to this and say, well, I can do it on my own, and you absolutely can do it on your own, but will you is the question.
Well, and here's what I run into with people. They'll come to me after their book's been out for a few months, and they'll say, I wrote this book that I'm really proud of. And sometimes great publisher, great cover, copy edited to perfection. I mean, they really do have a fabulous book in their hands. And they'll say, we made Amazon bestseller that first week, but then 3 months later, it was like nothing happened after that. They made Amazon bestseller, but what's next? And they didn't plan for that what's next and how the book was going to lead to paid speaking or how the book was going to fill their group program or whatever hopes it was they had for what their book was going to do for their business or for their life. Not that making Amazon bestseller isn't a great thing, but quite frankly, it's not enough. That's not enough you're not going to just suddenly start getting emails in your inbox saying, we want you to be our keynote speaker. We pay $10,000. Like, that's not how it works. So you have to proactively do something beyond that to leverage it, to turn it into those opportunities. You hope, the book sort of opened the door. You still got to walk through the door and do something. So I get a lot of those kind of emails that it's a few months later and they're like, I don't feel like my book is doing anything for me. I get that a lot. Okay. And honestly, the problem is it is much, I can't emphasize this enough. It is so much easier to get publicity for your book before it comes out. And I'd say even the first couple of weeks it's out. Every week your book is out, the opportunities for publicity get smaller because journalists want something new. Right. They want to be the first one who writes about it, or they want something that's like they don't want something that came out a year ago. Right. So your best opportunities, your best shot at getting stuff is going to be, I'd say the 6 months, maybe more. I started marketing my book 9 months before it came out, but I'd say 6 months before the book comes out, and then the first couple of weeks after it's out, and then it is going to start dropping fast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I want to ask you about, so I'm going to throw this to you. We haven't discussed that we would talk about this topic. This is another
thing I teach is how to answer questions you don't know the answer to. So hit me with it.
Right. Well, you're probably familiar with this book and this person because she generates such a love-hate response. Rachel Hollis.
Okay.
Have you followed her book or anything going on?
I have. I've not read the book, but I have followed it.
Well, that's a different topic for a different day. I am one of the minority that was not a fan, but that's, different topic for different day. What I am amazed at is the ability for the book to continue generating the type of publicity around it that it is, and that it is sat at the top of Amazon bestseller, New York Times bestseller, all of these things. Like, it's been at the top for months.
Yeah.
How do you do this?
I think if we went back, and I have not looked, but I think if we went back and looked, she did get and lined up a lot of publicity, even if it was just podcast interviews and that kind of stuff leading up to the book coming out. And it's like a Instagram post going viral. I mean, there is only so much you can do to position your book to take off like that. And there are probably plenty of people who've done exactly the same thing she did, and it didn't happen for them. For whatever reason, she reached this critical mass and it sort of ballooned from there. But I guarantee you, she didn't just write the book in 30 days, push it out, and just hope something happened.
Right. That's pretty much guaranteed. Well, that's the wish for all of us, is that we have that level of success and that we can, to do that. I mean, who doesn't want to be the number one book in all of these categories all the time? And I mean, even if the benefit of being number one is that when somebody goes looking for a book on a certain topic, they may have never heard of you, but if they see your book sitting at number one and there's 487 positive reviews on it, right, they've heard of you now and they're going to buy your book. So it's then you get the benefit of the cold traffic who doesn't know anything about you. But, I just, as we wrap this up, I would love for you to kind of consolidate your top three, top three things you want people to just take away from this interview today.
I would beg of you to pick a date 3 to 6 months before your launch date. And I would really like it to be 6 months, but 3 months bare minimum. And just know that at 3 months, you're going to be scrambling, because that's bare minimum. So please, I'd love it if you picked 6 months and pick that date and put it on your calendar as, this is the day I have to get serious about marketing my book. Because if you don't, you won't. Most people don't enjoy the marketing piece of it, quite frankly. And so you'll just keep procrastinating on it. So I want you to literally put a calendar event on your calendar. This is the day it begins, and really try to sit down and put together a strategy. I've got going into our group program, we're adding a book module, and I did a 3-month, I think 4-month and 6-month timelines for what you should start doing. For example, if you want to be in a print magazine, you've got to be pitching for print 4 to 6 months before the issue it would be in. So I had a client who came to me recently and wanted me to pitch for a print article for Valentine's. They closed the Valentine's you probably in October or November,
right.
not in January. So for print, you need that long lead time. And that's part of why you want to start so far out. And then, like I said before, if you've got to seed smaller blogs and podcasts, you want to get started on that at that 6-month mark. So by the time you're at the 3-month mark, some of that stuff is published and now you're pitching for bigger stuff and you've left yourself enough time for that. Also, like I said, with podcasts, you can record and then usually ask them to hold it until the week the book's coming out. So you can get this big push of publicity the week the book comes out, which will help with Amazon bestseller status and help get you to the top and keep you at the top. So if you plan in advance and you really start building out that timeline 6 months or more in advance and put the dates on your calendar, like today's the day I start pitching for this today, and you block out time on your calendar. I mean, everyone's personality is different, but what I know I have to do for me is if I say I'm going to pitch for podcasts, I have to make appointments with myself on my calendar to write the pitch, to look for the outlets. If I do not block out actual appointments on my calendar to do that work, I'll never do it because I'll prioritize client work and I'll take on additional things. So I encourage you, actually put that stuff on your calendar and then honor those meetings with yourself. Don't say, oh, but this client needs me more, and take it off your calendar and put the client in the spot. Make those in advance and commit to keeping those appointments with yourself, and you'll find that's how you'll find the time to be able to pitch and get that early publicity for your book. So I think it's planning in advance. I would say it's very important I would go heavy with podcasts. We have found podcasts do really well for our clients. People get to hear the passion in your voice for what you do, like you've probably heard from me during this. That makes a huge difference in them wanting to buy the book or wanting to work with you. So I think podcasts are huge. And if you can do them, record a lot of them and have those dates situated, say the week leading up to the book coming out, the week the book comes out. I had a client who just did a really good job of that. Quite honestly, he pitched a lot of the podcasts before he hired us and he lined them all up around his launch date. And it was like, all of a sudden you saw and heard him everywhere. And that's one of those things where if you keep seeing it and hearing it, it's in your timeline, it's on the podcast you listen to, like this author is suddenly everywhere. You're going to buy the freaking book because you're going to be like, the universe, like keep showing this to me. And you're going to be like, what is the buzz all about? Well, he created all that buzz. That was all just that he planned it, booked the recordings, asked them to have it out, but because he got all of it right there together, you felt like his book was everywhere. And he had a great launch. So I would highly encourage you, podcasts are where it's at. I mean, go for the other stuff too, but I think you'll see a big difference with podcasts. And I think the last one we sort of talked about, but focus first and foremost, not on what you need for the book, but what the people you're pitching need.
Amen.
What is their audience going to walk away? I mean, I literally, and you know this because you've been in my group program, but I literally have a sentence in every pitch I send that says, your audience will walk away knowing how to fill in the blank, or your audience will walk away motivated to, because maybe if it's more of a motivational, inspirational thing, I spell it out now. I've already spent a whole pitch detailing that there is a problem. Here's why I'm the person to solve the problem. I've done all this other stuff. But one of the last lines I put in every pitch is, your audience will walk away knowing how to, because at the end of the day, those gatekeepers, the podcast hosts, the editors, the producers, their number one job is to provide value for their audience. So you've got to prove to them in your pitch that you are going to provide value to their audience. And just in case they didn't quite get it with everything else you had in your pitch, you tie it up in a neat little bow with that sentence towards the end and smack them in the face with what their audience is going to learn. Your pitches will have a much higher success rate. I know it because I switched to that method probably almost 2 years ago now, and I've seen our rates greatly increase since I did that. So I know it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, it's a very compelling argument. And at the end of the day, I think from my takeaway, it's start early, early, and get everywhere you can. And it's work. You have to do the work. You have to do the work. And I hate to put out the tough love here, but I have a lot of people that will come back to me after their launch and say, no one's buying my book. And I start asking these questions. What have you been doing to market it? And they're like, well, I posted on my Facebook page. It's not enough. The 4,500 people that are following you on your Facebook page that might see 2% of your posts either already bought the book or don't care to buy your book. So you have to.
The most successful thing I did for my last book was also the most time consuming. I decided my last book was on sports business. At the time I was ESPN's sports business reporter, and my book was about the business of college football. And I decided about 9 months before the book came out that one way I could market the book and get people to buy the book would be to try to get professors to adopt it as a text in sport finance classes. Every sports management program in the country pretty much has a sport finance class. I was sort of aware of that already because I did a lot of speaking at that point in sports management programs. And so me and an intern spent, I can't even tell you how many hours looking up not every sports management program in the country. Quite frankly, I didn't have that kind of time. I wish I had done that, but I didn't have the time. But we looked up probably, I don't know, 100 of them, something like that. We figured out who taught the sport finance class, found their email. I then pitched the book to all these professors to adopt as a text. And to like further entice them, I told them I would have like PowerPoints for certain chapters that would make it easy for them to teach the book. I got my book adopted in over 50 university classrooms. When people have to buy your book for class, your book sales do better. It's funny how that works. Now, my book's been out for 5 years and people can buy used copies now. Like you see the biggest sort of punch that first time around. But like not only did the legwork take a lot of time, I had to pitch far enough in advance. I had talked to a professor who'd given me the advice, and I knew I had to pitch far enough in advance that they would have time to fill out all the paperwork they have to fill out at the university to get it listed as a text for the upcoming semester. So I was pitching in like the early part of the calendar year for fall semester.
Oh, wow.
Because that was the earliest I was going to be able to get it into classes. And I created the PowerPoints for some of the, I didn't do it for every chapter, but I did it for some of the chapters because I knew if I could make it easy, same thing we talked about with editors earlier, if I could make it easy on the professor to adopt my text, and they weren't going to have to make their own PowerPoints because I had already done it for them, and I ended up giving them lecture guides. So not only did it end up in over 50 university classrooms, but 5 years later, I still make a significant portion of my paid speaking from being invited to universities that are using my book, who pay me to come in and speak about my book. So my book's been out for 5 years and is still paying dividends for me. As a matter of fact, I did a Facebook post like a week ago because I counted it up. I've been paid to speak 66 times about my book.
Wow.
And I did not add up how much money it is, but it's a lot. But 66 times, and a huge portion of that is at the university level because I got my text adopted in classrooms. So, I mean, that strategy doesn't work for everyone because maybe you don't have a book that fits into a class, but really think maybe you do. I mean, I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs that we looked, and there were entrepreneurship classes. A lot of schools are adding entrepreneur programs. And so we looked at entrepreneurship classes, both for speaking opportunities or for getting the text adopted. So I'm not saying everyone can go out and duplicate what I did. What I am saying is the reason I was able to do it is because I started 9 months before my launch. And even then I was scrambling a little bit. So what you said about like, you can never start too early, or I think you said start early is kind of the key. I always tell people you can never start too early. Like there's no such thing as too early for marketing your book. And you need to give yourself that time if you want that strategy that's really going to blow it up and have those long-term dividends. I mean, my book's out for 5 years and I still make money on it, not from the book sales. I still sell a book here and there. I get reports from my publisher, like it happens, but the real money has come from the paid speaking and the consulting that have come from my book. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had the marketing plan for it. It just, no one would have just stumbled across it and offered me those opportunities.
It's so great. And if you do some brainstorming, I mean, you talked about the sports management classes and the finance classes and things like that, but you can find, I mean, there's a conference for everything under the sun. You know, how to raise your cats happier. I'm sure there's a conference about it. You know? There are agencies that support every interest under the sun. So if you do a little bit of research, I mean, for me, I started when I wrote Sunshine After the Storm, a survival guide for the grieving mother. I started reaching out to bereavement groups and organizations and boxes. There are care package and box organizations that send out boxes to bereaved parents, and they're looking for things to put in them. So I would offer them a significant reduction. I sold it to them almost at cost. It wasn't about making money for me. It really wasn't with that particular book. But I wanted my book in the hands of everybody who possibly needed it. So there are lots of ways to do that. And then that gets you out there and it grows your everything. It grows everything. So
think outside the box. You just reminded we helped a client get their book into nursing homes.
Right.
I forget exactly what, this was really early on in my business, and I forget exactly what the angle of the book was, but it had something to do with it was meant for like the child of someone who was going into a nursing home. So it was about the adjustment or about financial things you need to take into consideration. I can't remember all the specifics, but we were contacting nursing homes one by one, or you'd contact like one that was a chain. You could contact like the home office and getting the nursing home to buy the book to give as like a free gift as someone came in or as someone was looking at the nursing home, even maybe this like free gift that they were able to give their customers and potential customers. But they were buying the book in bulk from my client.
Right.
So think outside of the box about who needs to read your book and where do those people hang out? What do they do? What organizations are they part of? You know, what kind of stores are they going to? So maybe it's not just about getting your book into a bookstore, but I had a client who wanted to be more in stores like Hallmark.
Right.
For the type of book it was, or wanted to be in a clothing store because it was specifically about fashion. Like, think outside of the box. It's not just about getting into bookstores. There are some really cool opportunities out there to sell your book and to sell it sometimes in bulk with these kind of outside of the box opportunities. You've got to give yourself the time to think of that.
Absolutely.
It's got to happen well before the book comes out.
Indeed. Oh my gosh, you've given so much great information.
And I could keep talking about it.
Yes, I know. Well, and that's just, I mean, she's just scraping the bottom of the barrel here. So, or if you would like to, is that the right expression? Like just the top of the surface. We're not getting down to the bottom yet. From the Shadows into the Spotlight is the name of your group coaching program, right? And what's so fantastic about this is that it's self-paced. You can go through, she teaches you the steps of doing all of these things. And I know because I've gone through the program, but also what I think is really phenomenal is that she offers weekly office hours so you can show up anytime and ask questions. And as you can see, she's happy to share away. So we'll put that link in this so you can sign up for that as well. And just briefly, you've got a writer's retreat coming up in October. So can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this goes back to the idea that no one makes time for this. So I thought I was doing retreats already for entrepreneurs. And I thought, what if I started doing retreats that were just for authors? And they came, and it's a Thursday to a Sunday. The next one that's coming up is the first full weekend in October. And it's that Thursday to Sunday. And you will leave with an individualized to you timeline for marketing your book. So, and if you don't know your launch date, we'll pick one and then you can adjust the dates later, but we'll actually plan out your launch exactly like today's the day I start pitching podcasts, or today's the day I pitch, for magazine articles. It'll have everything you need to do for 3 to 6 months leading up to your launch, depending on how much time that we have. You'll have access to my group program. You actually get my group program as part of the retreat so that you can access my trainings on how to write the pitches and that sort of thing. So it's not just the timeline. You're going to have all the things you need to actually implement the timeline. You get a post-retreat one-on-one call with me as well. But the idea is that you probably won't make the time. A lot of you are going to hear this and you're going to know you need to do it, but you're not going to do it. So coming to this retreat will force you to do it. The time will be on your calendar and you won't be doing it alone. For these retreats, I'm doing one-on-one time during the retreat with each individual person because I cap it at 6 authors. And there's 2 publicists there, me and another publicist on my team, Megan. And you'll get individual time so that this is not like a one-size-fits-all plan. We'll help you brainstorm that stuff. Like maybe you should be talking to nursing homes right. And get that on the calendar for when you reach out to them. And I'll show you what the letter looked like that we sent to the nursing homes. I get a lot of that from my clients. They'll say, I'm thinking about pitching this. Have you ever pitched that before? And I'll search through my sent mail and show them an example of how I've done that before. So it's not just the more, I don't want to say generic, but that sort of high level pitching advice that's in the group program. But if you have a really specific need, I'll go find where I've done it before and show you exactly what it looks like. So you'll plan out the timeline. You'll have everything you need to actually implement it. And that way you don't have to worry that you're not going to make the time for it. So that retreat would be ideal for somebody whose book is going to launch early 2020, because you want to give yourself that 3 to 6 months when you leave the retreat to do the marketing. But a lot of that material is in a brand new book marketing module that I'm putting in the group program as well. So if you're someone who is a self-starter, who's really going to put it on a calendar and do it yourself, all that same material will be in the group program. The retreat's for people who know they're not going to do it unless they come to the retreat. And I'm like that. I just went to a retreat for exactly that reason because I'm that person.
It's wonderful. Well, I thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us. Even if someone hasn't gotten to the point where they're even written their book yet, I think they have a much better appreciation of how important it is to start the marketing from the very beginning. I laugh about the fact that I came up with my idea for my World War II spy novel. And I know the storyline, it's in my head, but I had a mock cover drafted and started marketing my book and building my launch team before I'd even written a word of the book.
Yeah. I started giving the title. My last book was called Saturday Millionaires. And I started giving the title on like radio interviews when I got the book deal, which I was with a traditional publisher. So from the day I got the book deal till the day the book came out was about 2 years. And as soon as I got the book deal, I started like titling myself. I would do a radio interview and they'd say, how do you want to be titled? And I'd have them say, Kristi Dosh, ESPN sports business reporter, and author of the forthcoming book, Saturday Millionaires. I did that the whole time. Well, right before my book was ready to come out, as it was still like going through the process of the publisher, they came back and they were like, we want to change the title. Like this just isn't working for us. What happened was I was with a publisher who the division my book was in got bought out by another publisher. The second publisher didn't love my title. And I was like, yeah, but I've been saying the title for 2 years. It's a hashtag on Twitter. Like that's how much I've used it. Other people use the hashtag. And I was able to go back and show them all of the publicity and marketing I'd already had that named me as the author of the forthcoming book, Saturday Millionaires. And they were like, okay, we'll stick with it.
Yeah,
and
it's stupid for them not to.
Love to change your title. And I was like, I
won. All right. Well, this has been awesome. So much information. And man, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.